early works to the present. So whether we find works from the 8th century or works from nowadays that I'll share some with you too, we'll find that the large portion of Arabic and Persian literature before the 20th century is in the form of poetry, and even prose from the period before the 20th century especially is filled with snippets of poetry or is in the form of rhymed prose or saj. Even the titles of the books, they didn't just give like 2 words or 3 words. It was usually a long, rhymed, in most cases, title. And there is religious poetry, but lots of poetry also is not necessarily religious. And some is doubtful, like the Sufi ones, whether it was written, for a beloved or whether the beloved was really God. So there is room for debate, as with everything else. Okay, but the interesting thing, for example, about any poem, in the traditional form, is that I'll read you a couple of lines and see if you can hear what I'm trying to get at. So this is called Al-Ghadir Al-Tamuh. قال الغدير لنفسه يا ليتني نهر كبير مثل الفرات العذب أو كالنيل ذي الفيض الغزير تجري السفائن مقرات فيه بالرزق الوفير هيهات يرضى بالحقير من المنى إن إذا الحقير. Do you hear anything at the end? Ear, right. So the ear it means that all of them are ending in that ra. So the Arabic, Arabic we call it a bayt, which is like in English it would be house, but the literal translation, but the verse or whatever, and it always ends in the same letter, so there would be one that ends in a ta letter, one in a ra letter, and so on. So the rhyming was very important. And the themes of the poetry range from hymns of praise to bitter personal attacks, from religious and mystical to poems on wine and other taboo subjects. And the personal attacks are very funny, and some of them would be like, and there are 2 big books we have at home, for example, Al-Farazdaq, like 2 poems who were Garir al-Farazdaq, I guess. They were always writing, they each belonged to a different tribe, and they respected each other, but they would write poems, in response to each other, which was not very complimentary. And so you always want to show how your tribe was good and other people were cowards and so on. But the easy one that, again, I remember from my first literature course in college is accusing a tribe. I shared that already with the people who came to the Quran reading, is accusing people of being very miserly and awful in each way. So they say they're such a people so that if their dogs bark at night, they order their mom to go pee on the fire. So how many insults are there? Could you think? So the dogs are barking at night, meaning there are people traveling. And then they see that there's the fire, so people didn't have motels and so on, so they need to have hospitality, and shelter with someone. So they don't want that, so they want to turn the fire off so nobody would know where they are, and they are too stingy, they don't want to put water, so they're using urine, and not anybody's urine, their mother, who should be sitting there, and people serving her, right? So they're such awful people. Okay, when we come to the literary aesthetics, we find that there are certain features of the poetry which could be applied to all of the literature. And first of all, it must be pleasing to the ear. So whether like all that kabir, saghir, safir, whatever sounded pleasing to you or not as non-Arabic speakers, but to an Arabic speaker that would be like, oh, that's so nice. And the poetry and much of the prose was written and designed assuming that it would be spoken aloud also, because it was, some people were literate and educated, but lots of people were not, and there was the popular, probably lots of these poets and literary figures played, a popular role and then a courtly role. So they'll go to the court and stay there and be with the, literati and the educated people and the rulers, but also they probably went out and sat on the coffee shop or its equivalent and entertained the masses. And that's how, the literature and history got transmitted from one generation to another. And again, great care was taken to make all writing as beautifully flowing as possible, to the extent that, this is a true story. Like sometimes It hasn't happened often. Well, it still happens anyway. When I'm at the mosque, let's say, and the sheikh who's teaching Quran doesn't know English very well, so he'll say, why don't you translate? So he'll say, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, wa Insha'Allah, wa, blah, blah, blah. And then people would say, what did he say? And I'll say, he said, thank God. And they'll all look at me, it's like, no, really, what did he say? And I say, he said, thank God. But because he repeated himself in different ways. So sometimes for an Arab, it's not bad style to repeat yourself over and over, but in English this would be redundant, stop that already, So we do have like the emphasis by saying this is beautiful and this is marvelous and this is gorgeous and this is amazing, and here it's again like, stop it, we know what you're trying to say, right? But like there is this, the language is, there is pride in it and showing how flowing and beautiful and how many words that are synonyms that you can say in one place. Okay, so when we come to the Abbasids, which are experts in, we find that the Umayyads was yes, Islam spread, but the rulers were, mostly concentrated, they didn't know what to do, and they were still, Arab focused. But now Islam was becoming, and Islamic society was becoming more of a universal reality, and the culture was becoming more universal. So, as more and more people from other ethnic and religious backgrounds joined the Arabs with Islam, something was about to happen. So there was transformation from, again, a religion of a relatively small number of Arabs to a universal faith. And people think that people would convert to Islam in one day. Of course, it was something that took a number of years, sometimes centuries, for a population of a whole city or country to become fully Muslim. And there is so much literature and so many books and so many manuscripts that even Arabic speakers don't know everything that survived. And every once in a while we will come across a new book that we would have had sitting in our library for years. And it's like, oh, I didn't know we have this. This is so much fun. So lately I've been mesmerized by a book that was written, the author died in 1320. And he wrote about Egypt. And it's amazing, the stuff that is in it. But the last thing I read before we came here, showing that how, people were so aware that, okay, we're Muslims now, but then there is still the influence of the Christians and the Jewish people. So we have not to do like them. So like, oh, when it's the middle of Sha'ban, don't do this because the Jews and the Christians do this. And on Friday, don't do that because the Jews and the Christians do the, so there was all this fear of the fact that, the country was not Muslim before, and there are still minority who are living there who are not Muslim. Okay, there were, again, another change of seat of government. So Medina was the first government of the Muslims, then Damascus, and now Baghdad becomes the new capital of the Abbasid Empire, or Khilafah, or Caliphate. The city of peace, or Madinat al-Salam, is the name that was given to Baghdad at that time. And of course, it's so sad because Baghdad hardly had peace. It went through lots of trauma. And Baghdad became, in the early period, the political center of the empire. And because of the money that they spent, it became the center of science, literature, and arts. And so they built, of course, palaces, and they built mosques, and they built Dar al-Hikmah, which, again, you will hear about more when Karima has her lecture, inshallah. But I thought I'll just, again, bring your attention to the overlap. So during this time, a cultural coherence was maintained, even though there were people from all different backgrounds. So it's sort of like, think of it as America. One time somebody was challenging me. I had a student in class who was my colleague. He was editing a course, and he said, well, but Muslim civilization really wasn't Muslim. Look at them, they have people from Persia and people from here and people from there, what's this? And I said, what about America? You were originally from Guatemala. And he goes like, okay, so so it was a melting pot sort of place, sort of like we are here. So Arabic remained a factor of unity the same way that English is a factor of unity nowadays in the US. And of course, it was the sole language for religious purposes because people were afraid that if they start writing in other languages, that might undermine the unity of and integrity of the religious text. Okay, so even though you learned that the political disunity started happening because the empire was so big that it started, how can you rule all this expanse without and having everybody loyal to you, but the culture stayed united. Yes?
Yeah, with regard to cultural coherence, does Sunni literature look different than Shia literature? And if so, what themes are more pervasive in one or the other?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I don't have a very sophisticated answer to give you off the top of my head, but from my readings, yes, I could tell that if I'm sitting there and reading a source, whether I read it before or rereading it with a more mature eye, you could tell that, this person was loyal to Ali, or this person was loyal to, so and so, or you can tell, from the writing, of course, where the political loyalty was. Because in some of these people that, you can, study and have fun reading their stuff in English until you learn Arabic, it worked for the court. And if you work for the court, what do? It's sort of like, because the poets were sort of like the newspaper of today, you can't go on the news and, say every day and say, things against the government in the mainstream newspaper, even here, with all the freedom that's there. So at that time also, so sometimes it might have been real loyalty, or sometimes it's like, hey, my livelihood comes from this guy who's giving me land and money, and so I'd better be good. But you can tell, of course, the Shia Sunni split, nobody could deny that the undercurrent of it could be clear in lots of literature from that time.